I've been indirectly accused of acting or talking white. It is the most ridiculous accusation, and I often laughed it off. I grew up in the suburbs, and many people of color sounded like me. I don't remember anyone telling me I talked like a white girl back then. After I went off to college, people started to tell me that, and after I went off to college, people started to tell me that and joked about it. I didn't really get it, and I knew it wasn't true. I never really tried to talk or act like a white person. I grew up in a diverse community where diversity was truly respected and celebrated, like seriously celebrated. In high school, we had an international day every year where the different cultures got together to showcase their food, their culture, their dance, and just a whole bunch of stuff. Everyone looked forward to it. It wasn't only the so-called black cultures, it was all cultures, including European cultures and Asian cultures too. Anyone who wanted to showcase their culture could. It was one of the best traditions in my high school. Not to mention that I grew up in downstate New York, where almost every culture is represented, and there were even parts of the city where no one spoke English, and signs were in other languages. I never felt the need or pressure to be any culture or act any way other than my own or act any like anyone else other than myself. So it was strange to hear that I was trying to act white and feel the pressure to act more black, whatever act more black means. Um, I shrugged it off until the pressure got intense. Unfortunately, I was around racist and really ignorant black people for the first time when I went off to college. I call really ignorant and psychopathic black people hood rats. The racists and hood rats really hold on to negative stereotypes of black people. They seem offended and irritated that I didn't fit into their little black box. I call it little because it required anyone who could be physically identified as black to act one way, like a hood rat. They had to act ignorant, act submissive or inferior to anyone who had white skin, and had to act like they're from the streets. That was what they wanted from me. The hostility that I received from both the racists and the hood rats because I didn't act black was disturbing. Some racist or prejudiced white people would deliberately try to act black and use words or sing songs that stereotypical black people would use or listen to around me. It felt as if they were trying to let me know it was okay to act black. I couldn't stop acting white and be the real ignorant black person that they thought was hidden under. They were kind of telling me that I could stop acting white and be the real ignorant black person that they thought was hidden underneath. The hood rats would wait until I was alone with them, then start talking aggressively like the people in today's rap songs do. I felt pressured to start talking that way too, but I honestly don't talk that way. My family wouldn't allow me to speak slang or act like I was from the street while I was growing up. They knew that was frowned upon and would get me nowhere. So I have this repulsion to behaving or talking that way. It got really annoying, and soon I was constantly being bullied to act black. An ignorant white assistant manager, who wasn't racist as far as I knew, told me I was too uptight and needed to loosen up. She meant that I needed to act black. I know that is what she meant because she suddenly changed her behavior to mimic a stereotypical black person. I had worked with her for years and she never behaved that way towards me until a change in management occurred where an African American female who was into the hood rat culture took over. Then both assistant managers, there were two of them, started to act more street. Not all African Americans are hood rats. I grew up around some high class and respectable African Americans. They weren't hood rats who got rich and moved into the suburbs. These African Americans had generational wealth and lived in the suburbs for many generations. This was also before street culture became the mainstream before street culture became the mainstream representation of Black people. The African Americans I grew up around were more like the rich family from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Even the poorer ones didn't act like hood rats or even ghetto. They didn't act like that at all. I never knew hood rats really existed until I moved to upstate New York around 2011. I thought they were stereotypes, a racist delusion, or comical exaggerations by Black people until I was forced to interact with real hood rats. This takes me into stereotypes. I was stalked into poverty and a nomadic life. This meant that I had to live in poor neighborhoods and had to interact with people who I probably would never have been around had I been able to maintain my original lifestyle. As I've said before, I grew up in well off communities where even if you were poor, you benefited from the environment, the good environment that wealthy people kept for themselves. Low crime rates, well kept streets, good schools, etc. I feel as if there is a gap between what the people I grew up around would think about the racism problem and what the people who grew up in poor and or racist communities would think. If this racism issue is going to be addressed properly, then that gap must be closed. My recent experience with racism and my past in a community that would not tolerate racism can help each side see why the people on the other side thinks the way they do. The first thing is stereotypes. Before my experience living in racist communities, I grew up stereotypes. They were nothing but delusions or something made up by racists to protect their own white supremacy views. That's true to a certain degree. After being exposed to a different kind of African American, I realized that some of those stereotypes are real. I'm sorry, but the hood rat is the stereotypical ignorant Black person come to life. A lot of racists grew up only exposed to these types of African Americans, and that is where their idea of all Black people comes from. The stereotypical ignorant, violent Black person is real to them. Granted that these stereotypical Blacks have become very ignorant and backwards due to generation after generation being raised in racist environments where they were kept in poverty and ignorance. Nevertheless, the damage has been done, and these stereotypical Blacks have come to not only accept, but to show off their ignorance. I know what I said is very controversial, but it is what I have observed and lived near for over 5 years. Back to the racists and the hood rats suspecting that I was acting or talking white. I kept dismissing it as an ignorant and stereotypical delusion until having an unusual experience. I couldn't afford my lifestyle anymore, and I had to move somewhere that was less expensive. I ended up moving to a small city that was known for its open racism. That is where I was forced to have my first prolonged interactions with hood rats. I had visited the city many times before, and I knew they had a racism issue, but I was among the elite and didn't really have to interact with any of the locals that much. There were some locals in the programs I attended, but they were on their best behavior, so it didn't seem that bad. This time, I was broke, and I had to live among the locals for years. That's when I saw the bad side of the city, and it really lived up to its infamy. I got a retail job. I got a job in retail, and I worked with a girl who was African but came to America in her teens. She grew up in a multi-ethnic home because she was adopted by a white woman. She was now in her mid-20s, had a master's degree, and didn't behave like a hood rat. That is until an African American manager was hired. I didn't think the new manager would be a hood rat because hood rats came into existence after her time. Hood rats are the offspring of gangster bees, if you remember that, and roughnecks, if you remember that too. However, she acted so much like a hood rat that I started seeing her as one. When the manager took over, it was as if she expected everyone to act more black. Even the white assistant manager I spoke about earlier started acting hood radish. Remember, she even peer pressured me to stop being uptight and have a little fun, which meant acting like a hood rat, which meant saying ignorant things and start dancing out of nowhere for no reason, even though there is no music playing. I refused. A hood rat female was hired while the white manager um, was still there, and not the new hood radish manager that I just spoke about. So this was like before all that happened, and the African assistant manager had to manage her. This new hire was every bit a hood rat in speech and behavior. I overheard the assistant manager give her the heads up that this place was upscale and she had to stop behaving like a hood rat. The assistant manager said it in a way that the hood rat understood but wasn't offended. I thought that only meant she had to act polite and stop speaking slang. For a while, I kept hearing a new voice over the intercom. However, I never saw who the voice belonged to. I wondered who the new voice was. It was a white woman's voice, to put it in simple terms for the sake of this discussion. One day, I was walking up to the register when the new voice spoke over the intercom. As I was approaching the front, I saw the new hood rat hire speaking into the phone used for the intercom. I couldn't believe it. She sounded nothing like that before. Later on, I saw her helping a white female customer, and she was using the intercom voice and behaved like a white girl. Her imitation was so good that had I not heard her real voice and saw how she really behaved, I might have believed it. During breaks or off time, she went back to her hood rat voice and behavior. I was in shock. I had never seen or heard such a thing. She was a skilled imposter. Of course, she still looked every bit and very much like a hood rat, but if you closed your eyes or saw her only from the back as she transformed into a white girl, you probably would have believed it. Then it hit me. So that's why they thought I was faking it. That's why they thought I was acting white and was really a hood rat underneath it all. I started to pay attention to how the hood rats changed their behavior, and the same thing kept happening with more than one person and at more than one job. It was true that some hood rats faked white behavior and speech, depending on the situation or setting. They faked that. So, of course, that doesn't mean that all so-called black people did that. I certainly wasn't faking it. I came to understand one reason why the hood rats and racists were pressuring me to act like a hood rat. They thought I was being fake and wanted me to stop it. They seemed to have never met a black person who really talked and behaved in a way that sounded white to them. It's crazy, but it's true. Of course, I can't and won't change the way I speak or behave. It's the real me. They gave up and probably thought I was a delusional hood rat who started to believe in her own lie. That explained a lot. The sad part is that I tried to clear up the misconception by letting them know I grew up in a different environment, and the way I spoke, the way I speak is normal for the black people where I am from. They were stuck in their ignorance and refused to accept that. In their minds, all black people acted like hood rats in their downtime. They refused to stop applying that stereotype to all black people, even though I was living proof right in front of them that not all blacks acted like hood rats. I still don't know what to make of it. It was really a Twilight Zone experience. The point of the story is that some of the stereotypes are real and a real part of some people's lives. When the racists talk about these stereotypical blacks, know that these are real life people they're talking about. The hood rats in that city were violent. They committed crimes and were generational welfare recipients, and they were proud of it. So if you are like me and came from a place with more respectable Black people, try to understand that racists are describing what they have grown up around. On the other hand, racists and other ignorant people of all ethnicities need to realize that the stereotypes don't apply to all Black people. It was frustrating as someone who doesn't fit the stereotype to constantly have to try to point that out. I constantly had to try to clear that misconception. I had to point out that, hey, I know you see this, but that's not me. I'm different, whatever. And it was frustrating. It led to tense and sometimes hostile interactions with the people who refused to see outside the Black box. A lot of these people don't venture out of their communities to see or experience how other Black people live. Remember that I had to move there for financial and safety reasons, although it proved not to be that much safer. So I went into their territory as a foreigner from a community that many people don't believe exists, a community where racism wasn't tolerated way before recent events, a community where diversity was noticed and celebrated, a community that wasn't perfect but knew where it wanted to go, what it wanted to be, and diligently tried to reach that goal. I wanted to make the best out of the hell I went through during the years I was stalked. I saw a lot and I went through a lot. I am trying to make some good come out of it. And honestly, talking about what I observed can help in so many ways. I would probably say some controversial things, and I welcome those who can respectfully disagree. I'm not trying to build a name or brand out of controversy. I recognize that some people may perceive what I say as controversial. However, what I say is based on my real experience. Talking about it is also cathartic because I have held it in so long. I mean, over many years I've held this in. And I think that there are people out there who have had some similar experiences or can relate to some of my experiences, and they too have held it in. It's exhausting and not healthy. So if I could give them a safe place to let it out and talk about it, then I'm willing to take the risk of upsetting a few people. And that's it for today.